we'll just call you up and say we'd like to bring your and you will take this for sixth grade. So, well, I don't think
Pleasure of visiting in the restored Collins Schoolhouse, and I want to say personally I have brought 2 of my 4th grade classes out here, and it's a wonderful experience for them to learn some Ohio history other than reading a book, and it really makes a lasting impression on them. And the learning doesn't stop when they're here, because when they go back to the classrooms, then they write about it. So I would like to introduce Janine Montgomery and Naomi Whitaker and Sharon Stevenson, and they will tell you about the history of the schoolhouse. Thank you.
It's always a joy to see people at Collins School. When I finish this spring, I will have completed 18 years of Collins School. In June of 1986, I retired from senior, thinking that was the end of my teaching career. During that summer, my friend, Ann Stratton, she and Mrs. Brantley had shared a day of education in the classroom, and Helen had gone in and Ann had gone to the nursing home. And when Helen came back, she was telling Ann, she said, you know what, I have a little school. One of these days, I'm going to get that little school fixed up. And Ann said, well, when you get it fixed up, I'll put my own skirt on and I'll come out and teach. Helen didn't forget that. In June of 1986, she called Ann. She said, you know what? I'm getting that little school pretty close to finish. She said, I'd like to come by today and take you out, like you said. Well, when Ann came out, she fell in love with it too. But on the way back, Helen said, now, would you be willing to write a curriculum and be ready to teach the senior boys and girls this fall? And she looked at it, she said, you know, that's a pretty big chore. She said, I just retired, my parents are elder. And she said, you know what, I don't think I could do it myself. She said, could I invite my friend out? I happen to be that friend she invited. So we got busy that summer. We share with the children, we had to go back to the libraries. We had to look for things that the children would have worn, clothing, food they would have brought, what things we needed in their desk for the children. And we got all that ready, and it has been a real joy. We have children from all over the area, letters or requests. We've had them as far as Wilmington, on the other side of Columbus, St. Mary's, Ohio, Florence, Kentucky. We do take 4th, and we do have a few, we've had some 5th and 3rd grade classes that come, mainly the 4th from the area. We schedule all of the Xenia schools, and then the others are all by request. And since the school funding has been short, some of the schools have not yet been able to come, and we've really been disappointed with that. But Sharon Stevens and I teach children. We change. Now, it's just one classroom year, but they role play while they're here. One class will be their 1st and 2nd graders. The next will be the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And those big seats that you're in, today will be our big 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And it is a real joy. Helen and Virgil spent over $70,000 renovating this school. They gave it free to the last 2 years, and then, you know, a money problem hasn't been real easy. You haven't got much interest on that. And we're charging the children $3 now, and that still isn't very much when you think of a day here. But the children come dressed in beautiful clothes. They come with their lunch pails. And if it's raining, we take a brown bag that's in your desk and fold it on their desk, and they eat inside. If it's beautiful outside, they run outside. All the children get a turn to pump, they get a turn to ring the bell before they leave their day here. And as you say, they keep writing about it. We get letters back. And our program is for them to continue looking out and searching and finding the different things that we're sharing. How did grandfather live? How did grandmother? What did she cook? And all those things. And it really is a joy. And Janine's going to share about her family and the school.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're really pleased to have Naomi being here as one of the original teachers, and also Sharon, who came with her classes from Valley School in Beaver Creek. And kind of had in her mind when she first came, well, this would be something I'd love to do and my retirement, after my retirement. So we have enjoyed having Sharon here the last few years, being Naomi and she being full-time teachers here for all the field trips that the children take to this, what we call the living history of Collins School. And the school itself goes back to 1854 as far as the deed that was prepared on behalf of Samuel and Rebecca Collins, 150 years ago, excuse me. Samuel and Rebecca Collins lived in this stone house that was back the lane here. Now, you may not get a chance to see this, so I'm going to show you some pictures. This is what it looked like. And several generations of the Collins family lived in that house, starting with Samuel and Rebecca. They wanted this portion of their land given to the school board for the purpose of having a one-room school so their children and children in the neighborhood, of course, could go to a closer school. So there's actually a copy of the deed over on the board up there that you could look at. Then the first couple schools that were built were made out of stone. And if you look in the corner of the lot, over by the very corner where you entered from the parking lot, there are some large stones there. And if you look underneath the steps as you come in here, there are some evidences of the buildings being here before. We know that at least one of those schools burned. There were fireplaces on each end of the building, and the students sat on benches around the side of the room. So that was pretty difficult, I'm sure, for the students. My great-grandfather, James Martin Collins, went to one of the stone schools. And then about circa 1879, this red brick building was built. And the school was furnished with desks such as these. And James Martin's children, who also lived back in the stone house, we had several generations of the Collins family living there, and several Collins families lived in the neighborhood. So it was called the Collins School for that reason. As well as having school here, they also had the Collins Community Club, which was kind of like what was to be in the future, the PTAs and the PTOs of schools, where they, not only the children gave performances and things with their parents and recited and had plays and Christmas parties and things, but also the adults did some of the entertaining for the children. So we had Collins, the whole Collins neighborhood involved in Collins School. They had a great time. Well, I sometimes will show the children a picture of my grandmother, who was the next generation, and she was the generation that got to start here at Collins School. This is a picture of Florence Collins Bryson, and I'll mention her name in just a second. But she was this next generation and raised her family, which included my mother, Helen Bryson Brantley, here. And that generation then went to school here also. And this is a picture of my mother, Helen, when she would come out here. Now, about 60 years ago, of course, during World War II, things were changing on the farms and in the whole country and the world, of course. But we had, families from the farms that were leaving, transportation being what it was with the automobiles and the affordability of them and all. The generations that had lived on the farms were starting to look elsewhere for work and their futures instead of having the continuous generations on the farms. And so we had a lot of the farm families no longer here. And my grandparents had to sell the farm. They were having a hard time living back here. Their children were growing and they weren't going to stay there, going to school or going to elsewhere for jobs. So they ended up selling, and they sold to the Ruckworth family. I don't know if you've heard of Ruckworth Lumber in Dayton, but Mr. and Mrs. Ruckworth bought the house, the land, and at the same time, since there weren't enough children coming to school here, the school board for the Xenia Township closed the school. At that time, the township had its own board of education. The school was closed in 1944, And the children who would have come here went to Hilltop School, which you may be familiar with, which is right on the edge of Beaver Creek Township and Senior Township. A few years later, then Tecumseh School was built, and this is how our connection with Karen Morgan and Ross Morgan developed, because her children were going to Tecumseh, and I went to Tecumseh, and Naomi was a teacher at Tecumseh, so we had this connection there. And we got to know Mary and Ross Morgan that way. The school being closed was used for storage then by the Red Horse, and farm equipment and sacks of grain, etc. were in here, and all the things that were in here that had related to school that were in the way were taken out. And we don't know what happened to those old desks and some of the other materials. So it was eventually Mr. Rutherford passed away and things started to deteriorate. And I wanted to show you a few pictures. The school was known for its wonderful schoolyard, beautiful trees. Well, as the years went on, all these trees were taking the spot of where the children were playing their games. They were entering all these open spaces, and so hundreds of trees were taking their spot. We showed the children that there's pictures of trees that were actually growing out of the side of the building. There were so many trees on this land. And we had problems with vandals coming around and destroying and damaging things. So Collins School was looking very shabby. And my mother, lament the fact that the school was looking bad. It looked like a jungle was covering it up. It was very difficult to see that it was even a school at one time. And she knew the house was getting the same way, not terribly bad. Mrs. Rutherford was a lovely person, very interested in culture and all, but when her husband died, it was difficult for her to keep things up. So the day came that Mrs. Rutherford was willing to sell the house and the school to my parents. My mother had this dream that someday somebody from the family would be able to buy it all back and do something very special with it. So she hired Steve May, who was also prepared the guns in the scene of Blue Jacket where they had the fort. He's very good at restoring things and working with guns and cannons and so forth. And he fixed the house, made it very livable for a modern family. And my sister and her husband, Betsy Crandall and Dr. David Crandall, live there now. And this is what it was like now. It's wonderful. And the generations are there now, the 5th and 6th generation, so we think that's a pretty neat thing. I'll just show you a couple of pictures of when Steve May was restoring the inside of the school. That came after the restoration of the house. And there was quite a bit of damage from old age as well as the vandals. This is the platform up here. You can see the damage there. And the old stove and the doors where you came in.
That's the one that's keeping me warm today.
Right, so he restored the stove, and we really enjoy having that on in the mornings. Right here is one last picture. Now, while he was restoring the school, he discovered a really wonderful part of the school, and we show the children this each time they come. Right here, there used to be a blackboard on this wall. There's a chalk tray here. And when he was taking the blackboard off, he discovered this writing up here, which is an attendance list of the students and teachers who were there on April 20th, 1898. And it's especially special to us because it lists Florence Collins, who was my grandmother's name up there. She would have been about 7 years old at the time. And Carrie Ray, I don't know if anybody had ever heard that name here before, and Ed Huggins were the teachers. Carrie Ray, the regular teacher, and then Ed Huggins was the music teacher on that day. So I hope you get a chance to come up here. He made this wall then a memorabilia wall. Some of the artifacts that were found in here when he was restoring it. There weren't a whole lot of things, but we have several items identified here, and so you're welcome to come up and take a look at it. I hope you do. Well, and then about ago that my parents had bought it and had it restored. And somebody said, hire them, and she and Ann to come and work as, to be the living history presenters of a typical school day, and they enjoy using McGuffey readers and all kinds of things. Being in a historical society, you're probably interested in more things that are original, but if you go back into the cloakrooms, you will be walking on the original flooring in there, and some of it is getting a little bit saggy. But this platform was just replaced a few years ago. It was original too. Now, over the past 17 years, we've had almost 39,000 boys and girls that have enjoyed a day here, which we think is fabulous. Also, it started out with the Xenia schools, and then Sharon heard about it, and she said, we come. And it kind of started an avalanche, because then a lot of other school systems wanted to come to this line. They're getting a really wonderful day here, a memorable day that they will remember forever. Also, my aunt comes out and tells some of the history. Betsy, my sister, comes out and tells her history. And this Tuesday, when you come out with the St. Bridget students, Marion Poland will be here. You may have heard of him, a farmer and also active in the Greene County Farm Tour.
He's a former student.
Yes, he's a former student, and he will be telling about his experiences out here, which we think is really a neat thing for them to do. If you have any questions in particular, maybe Mary will have a question and answer period later, but I know you've got a lot of other things on your program. But hopefully this is a little taste of what we do. The children do use these privies. And one of the things that the teachers try to show them is how, back in the old days, toilet paper was something that was very expensive, and that they wouldn't have probably used that in the outhouses, and they kind of get a little education in how personal hygiene was conducted, and Naomi brings in a lot of flowers, and we also have herbs and things like that that they can be introduced to. So, if you have the next part of the program, I'd be glad to go ahead.
Are your ceiling pictures original?
Okay, these were similar to ones that my mother had remembered them being here. There were times that it wasn't quite that elaborate, and of course they didn't have electricity until, I don't know, the 1930s maybe.
Yeah, 33 on this, she said.
So it wasn't maybe quite as elaborate as that for many years.
She said it was too rock, like just with mud on that round.
But in order to have a living history, you kind of split it up a little bit. So the children would have plenty of light in here. They learn the script handwriting, and then during their writing lesson, they get to write on the slates. Use the
The things in the desk are ready for the children each day, so they use them.
So you're welcome to go through there. They also have craft each day that they do that's a craft to remind them of the Collins School. And they get to ring the bell and pump the pump and just explore the pony shed and things. Well, thank you very much. And we'll be available later too.
know that, and they start calling me Methuselah. Well, I like that name, but yeah, ain't a sweet thing back there. She was supposed to give this talk today, but she come down with laryngitis, so if I see her looking at me back there, I'll straighten up and fly right. But anyway, it's been a real privilege. Miss Morgan, Mr. Morgan, they done asked me to talk a little bit about the changes I've seen here in these here schoolhouses from way back in. You know, now this here is beautiful. Anyway, well, going back ways, back to around 1790 now, you're talking there, not many houses, schoolhouses around here, except for if you're calling them your house, that's where you were, you were teaching everyone's at your house. And by gum, if you had a parent or an aunt or uncle or grandma knew how to read and write and cipher some, well, you was lucky. You was real lucky. Now, usually they after their chores was done, they'd come in and have a nice supper. And they'd gather around after dinner there, and they'd listen to that Bible being read. Now that's a good book. There's a good book there. And anyway, they go over it with their mom, Paul, or whoever's reading to. They help them sound out those words. That's how they learn to read. And of course, they had to do some ciphering there too. They had to add and subtract and learn how to do that, because you know, they may have seen some nice doll or some nice pocket knife on that peddler wagon out there. They had to know how long it was going to take them to build up that much money buying things. And well, as I said, there come a time there though, things started growing out there. Lots more people come in this area. And, well, what time did I start that? Are you still? Yeah, I'll get on with it here. Now, they used something, well, they started planning for schoolhouses anyway. And, so they was doing some schoolhouses here and there. Now, they was using special things like here, them horn books over there. There's one over there. There's that window there, and over there in that back window. And that was just like a little paddle you found somebody's bottom. You know. But they put some piece of nice cloth of paper on there, and they'd put a little thin piece of horn. Now, you may wonder what a horn is. Yeah. I got an example in here right here. It's heavier every year. I heard something. Yeah, there it comes. Here it comes now. Here, horn. Yeah, well, it looks kind of thick there, don't it? But they had to soak these babies a long time, and shave it down there so it was real thin, so it was right over the top of that thing, so it wouldn't get dirty. Yeah, that's what they use right there. Now, Abby, what was the second paragraph? Oh, right, yeah. Well, she wrote me out this real nice thing, and I'm going to read to you what that, you remember Reverend Rankin, don't you? John Rankin? Yeah, he was an abolitionist, right? Yeah. Well, let me tell you, that boy grew up in some pretty raw times. Now, that's what he said about his first school. It was 2.5 mile distance, built around logs, a rough stone wall, allowed a log heap fire, just keep them logs on there. The floor was earth, had wide space between two logs, formed a place for light. Can you imagine that? 2 little logs. Clapboards weighted down the heavy poles. formed the roof. Seats was timber split slabs, oh yes, right, yeah, okay. As for the teaching, he says, our books were Dilworth's spelling book and the New and the Old Testament. And he says arithmetic was in the master's head. Sometimes there wasn't nothing up there. Now they all read loud, and the master used that switch real free and easy like for idleness or misbehavior. Now, this type of school, I believe, Evie says, was actually called a blab school. You ever heard of that term, blab school? Yeah, well, here's a little girl in school, one of these blab schools one time. She said, the teacher would sometimes they'd stay in the house of the people they was teaching. And this one teacher here, named Elijah, that's a good Bible name, I like that name. He agreed to teach 3 months, and every child was to bring him $1 in silver on the last day of the school. All right, well, this school, she described it like this. She says, that school, it was denominated as loud. And loud it undoubtedly was. Every scholar studied the very top of his voice. Each one seemed intent to excel his neighbor. And the result was a noise as of many waters that might at times be heard a distance about half a mile. Can you imagine it? And little scholars yelling out their Bibles and things like that, reading that. Well, anyway, that's Bible, that's blab school. Now, they also was doing some ciphering now. They use them slates there. I think I saw one of them over here. Slate. Oh, thank you, ma'am. Oh, gracious. Thank you very much. They use them for slates here. Here, let me take this here. They use that there for slate. Now, if that slate, they'd use that for ciphering sometimes, all right? Now, they'd say 2, they put that 2 down on there, and they'd learn how to do that too. You know, it looks something like that. And then they put their plus sign there, like that. Can you see that, boy and girl? All right. Now, you're going to add something to that. It might be a 1. You want to add an egg, 1 egg to it. Oh, all right, we're making a recipe here. And you got that right under there. You make it 2 plus 1 is 3. All right? Got that? Now, there's going to be a test later. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about how much them slates cost, because they weren't cheap. Now, here, Ed found me some information about slates back there. He says, Journal Education. This is from the Journal Education. Now, it must be true. For August 1870, this is a little later than blab schools, you know. Yeah. Them slates was available at 57 cents per dozen. For another 7 cents, now this is a math problem. Think of it as a math problem. You could purchase 100 slate pencils. Now that's a real deal. Now, you know, as I said, it started, you know, people started coming in out of this area, and they'd come clamoring for more school places, and so they started building fine schools. Nothing as fine as this. Now, this is just, I think this is the prettiest school I've ever been in. I worked in quite a few, but I've been here at Collins more years than you can count. Now, it's just been real fun seeing them little things out there, all them little scholars, learning all sorts of wonderful things, learn about nature and mathematics, and why, some of them, they even learned how to spell. I ain't too real good at spelling, but Anyway, I thought maybe, Abby thought you might like to see some of the outfits them teachers might have worn back then. Now, of course, the first teachers, they was, men. Because women couldn't do nothing outside the house except work. Ain't that right, Abby? She's nodding yes. She can't talk. Well, anyway, these, when it was time for them women to come out to do this kind of stuff, this kind of work, they wear real pretty things. You know, this is a real pretty little bodice, they call it bodice. They wore it around their little shoulders and put a little pin up here. And here's some shoes that are called gillies. They wore them kind of things back in. And, oh, this is going to be pretty. You're going to like that. But here you are. Now, this is for everyday. This is for everyday folk. Here's your skirt. This is actually your petticoat here. That's your petticoat. And they didn't wear just one. They wore many of them under there, depending on how cold it was out there. Now, they might be quilted too under there. You just want to know. I mean, you don't look under there. You know. And they wore this little thing called a chemise here. And this is their underwear. Their little underwear. They wear that all the time. They put this little bodice over there, and just put it together there without string and had to hold up there. Now, that's your everyday look. Now, you got something over here. This is for the boy over here. Yeah, well, we got this pretty little thing. This should look like them on a big Greenaway dress, don't it? Ain't it pretty? Yeah, and it's got a mondo with it. Now, no, I'm not going to put them on. I'm not going to try them on. Big comfortable. There's this bar here. Now, of course, now you know, the ladies never went nowhere without their bonnet on. So you put that on the head there first. Okay, up there now. All right. And then put this in there. You kind of get the idea there. Okay, yeah. All right, well, that's the put away for you. Drop in there, that's pretty nice. So anyway, that was around early century, 1810, 20, 30s, something like that here. Now, and of course now, when oh yeah, the type of schools was changing. They was getting books now. They was getting books kind of to read. They're am I going on too long yet? Oh, speed up here. They's called McGuffey readers. Now, says here that man McGuffey was born in 1800. So that man knew he was coming into a good century. And so he thought he was going to make something himself, and he did. Didn't he? He done, well, they're right here. Right here. I saw them right here.
On my hand.
Oh, you got one there too?
Yes.
You're really prepared, aren't you? You're a scout. You're a darn good scout. Yes, you are. So, this is the electric, I told you I wasn't too good at spelling. McGuffey's third eclectic reader, and that's a little more advanced. That's for the older boys and girls. Now the first ones, the first and second ones was more about oh hey, wait a minute. Here we are. Oh yeah, you had to write with these tools too. You had to know how to take that tip right off and make a point out of it, and you cut those slit in there. But anyway, where's that McGuffey stuff? Well, anyway, he put that book together, and these was good stories in there. And them children learned how to spell from one of them there. They got the eclectic spelling book. Let me see what kind of words they got in here for them little boys and girls. Oh my, Methodist. I won't go any further than that. Yeah. Now, yeah, here we are. Oh, yeah.
That's your reputation.
So anyway, they was getting these books here. We already went over that. All right, and believe it or not, that boy at McGuffey, he was only 14 when he went out and started, being a teacher. That man was an amazing little man. So anyway, they come up with other books. People started, publishing other little books. Look at that, little children's books of the 1850s. And here's a couple of them. And here I'll name out to you: The Adventures of Tom Plump. All right, the story of the little drummer. Things like that. Now that gave the children a lot of practice reading. They could take them home and take them out of their library. Now, of course, everything wasn't always work. There's some playing ball, too. And they'd go out for recess about an hour. They'd be in school about 10 hours a day, they would. Now, she put this thing. Well, anyway, they put a jump. Yeah, there's a rope there, there's that there. Oh, there's a fun one. Let's have a board like this one. Yeah, let me get that out there. Yeah, look, here's that tooth stick right there. Yeah, get that thing going there. Yeah, there you go, see? I've been there and I've done that. Oh, this here one's a really, well, there's the ball and cup. It's around this thing. This is not real easy. It's not as easy as it looks. See what I mean? All right. Oh, yeah. For sure. Oh. Now, I need somebody to help me with this here one. Would you come up? You're all prepared. Sure, I'm prepared. Now, would you, I'm not going to bend you that point in. Here, you take that in. And I'm going to take this. Now, this is you got it pointed. Good. All right, now this game's called Grace. Oh, look at that, Grace's shake. I don't know why. It's called Graces. Now, this is one of the ways that the little girls could get their exercise without seeming unseemly. And without sweat or glistening. They glisten. They wouldn't sweat. So the object of this here game is to get this little round thing off the end of my sticks on the prepared sticks here. You ready?
I'm ready.
Ready?
Ready?
Ready. Here we go. There you go. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, and this is what Abby put in there. I think she meant it for me. There's another game. There's them little boys and girls played when they went home at night after their chores was over. Well, they might get around a circle and they'd say, "Let's play twirl the plate." Or they'd twirl that plate around. They'd name somebody's name, and that person had to grab it before it dropped to the floor. That's a fun game. Real fun. Yeah, these are here's an example of them shoes they wore back. Well, I'll show you that. I may seem a little scattered today. It's the weather. Well, here's what they is. Well, I guess I gotta touch it after all. Here's a little bonnet they used back there in 1850s or 60s, so right like that there. And here, this is what they kept their little items in. Their sewing items or keys. If they had a housekeeper, come on in, dear. Come on in. Come right on in. Now, there's a pocket. Put that around your waist and you know where everything is right there. Now, this here is the unmentionable thing that went on underneath all them clothes. And I don't want to touch that too much. Yeah, they'll get jealous of me. Now, this here is the way they was made back in the 1850s and 60s. You got quite a bit of fluff going on here. Now, I would wonder how they get down them aisles myself. I don't know, but those things. Now, there was another type of school came along that time, and it was kind of a secret. And not too many knows about it. Fact is, nobody wanted to know about it. And it was called a pit school. You heard of that? Pit school. It was not where you go to bed. But this kind of school there was started down south, way down south, and it was started by slaves who wanted to learn how to read. And of course, if a slave learned to read, that plantation owner was pretty scared, because he knew that slave would rebel and leave. So, middle of night, we'll go out. In fact, there's a nice little story about this that found on that machine called that internet. And it's called, a story written by Gary Paulson, and it's called Night John. Maybe it was something to do with relieving yourself. Oh, no, I don't think so, no. It says that the author says that one of the things he ran into several times was the slaves' attempts to learn to read. For the slaves, it was a capital offense to learn to read, and they could be killed. They usually didn't get killed right away because they was too valuable to a slave owner. So the owners would cut the thumb off, or sometimes a toe. Sometimes the front of the foot are chopped off. Men were done badly too. And they was always whipped. Now that didn't stop them though. They kept going. Now what it was is that they could dig a hole in the ground and they'd cover it with branches and things so that no light would show through. And they'd go down there and teach each other to read. By golly, freedom was that important. It still is today. Don't you even think it ain't. Now, I suppose my time here is just about up. Oh my goodness, I'm running along. Now, I'll bring up the last, last quote that was worn back in there. And, that was about coming on to 1890s, 1880s, 90s. And Abby just loves this little costume here. She just loves this one. You know, she tends to like these frilly things. I'm not too fond of them myself. But anyway, here's the little blouse. You know, you wear that in there. Your basic black skirt there. A little bow down here to crimp it up a little bit, and then you got your knickers here, and of course, then you got your little stays there. You got your cute little stays there, little camisole type stay. Now, of course, you knew this is the thing that the little kids, they start laughing about when you tell them about this kind of thing. They say, well, wasn't it kind of hard to go to the restroom or something like that? Long dress on? And I said, well, yeah, normal, yeah. But I tell them that they weren't like this. Fact is, they had a little hole there, right there for sort of, you know, so it's easy for the ladies to go relieve themselves without taking all them things off. They got corsets and everything on. So I kind of would like to tell them that. Brightens them up a little bit. Makes them wonder about things. Yeah, boy. Well, and of course they got all kinds of games to play, and nowadays in the library, you can find all kinds of wonderful things, like old-fashioned things, and I celebrate the old-fashioned because I am. Because I just am, and I'd rather be there than be there and there. You know what I'm saying? Well, anyway, I do appreciate your listening to me rambling on here, and see if there's nothing else here. Check it out and see if there's something else here. Oh, well, not really a whole lot of things, but the them children like to play with old marbles and things like that, you know, so that's what they play with. I always like them little tops and stuff. Well, anyway, that's about it for me, folks, and I appreciate your listening, and I'm sorry for taking up your time back here, but, well, you just tell everybody hello next time you see them, and I'll be cleaning out things after.
Thank you, that was Jan Campbell. We thank her very much for sharing all these interesting things. I'd like to introduce Phil Rothman now, who's going to tell us a little bit about early Yellow Spring schools.
I don't know how at all possible to follow that out.
Bill, you want a chair?
I'm probably going to need one.
Just bring one of those out.
Here.
You, anybody know how many stars there are in that flying up above me? Okay, how many? 45. How do you know? What do you think it was made?
Do you want to go on the other side?
Hmm?
That little easier, he would be on the other side.
He's fine, thanks.
The other side?
No.
Teacher didn't sit down here and take care of his class, you know. The teacher sat here in that recitation bench over here, and the kids would come up and sit on the recitation bench, taking their turns, because they were all in different grades, as you know. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a man named Jesse Stewart. How many people know Jesse Stewart? Well, then we all got a treat, because Jesse Stewart is a very special guy. Jesse Stewart was born in Kentucky somewhere around the early 1800s. Pardon me. Yeah. Let me change that. Early 1900s. Maybe late 1800s. I don't have dates on it. He died sometime around 1970. And he was a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, a poet, a writer, and a storyteller. He's considered one of the greatest folklorists that we have. And he grew up about 150 miles from here, down in the middle of Kentucky in Greenup County. And when Jesse Stewart was 17, he had finished 3 years of high school. He was assigned to teach a class in the school district next to the one he had grown up in. Now, it was a special circumstance there because his sister had taught school that year, that same school the year before he came. And she'd been beaten up by one of the boys and sent home and quit the job. And he decided that he was going to go and take her place, which he did. He tells that story in a book, a biographical book he was written, called Thread That Runs So True. And The Thread That Runs So True is an interesting title. And I'm going to find that for you. This is a book called Jesse Stewart's Kentucky. It was written by a woman named Mary Washington Clark. It was actually her PhD thesis, in which she told about Jesse Stewart and the background of what he came from. And it has a whole history and description of things. I may read some more of it to you. But the thread that runs so true is part of a little rhyming song that the children used to sing. Now, we know that Kentucky especially was a place where there is this tremendous background of folklore. And I think most of us, when we grew up at school, when we went out to recess to play, we played games and we had various rhyming games that we would play. I don't see any kids doing that anymore. Do they do it? Are they skipping rope and saying their games?
Yes, some of the
Bouncing balls? We used to do that all the time. Well, these kids in Kentucky they would get their recess and they would rush out of the schoolyard, and then they would play these games. And one of the games they would play was the needle's eye. And they would all gather and form a circle. And then two kids who were the two leaders, would go, one would be outside the circle and one would be inside the circle. And they would hold hands above the kids in the circle and they'd go around. And all the kids would then sing the song. Now, I can't sing it for you. I can't sing anyway. But if I could, I couldn't because I don't know. So I'll have to recite it to you. The needle's eye that does supply the thread that runs so true. Many a bow have I let go because I wanted you. Many a dark and stormy night when I went home with you, I'd stub my toe and down I'd go because I wanted you. And they'd bring their hands down and pick somebody out. That person would go out and they'd go on around, and alternately, as they picked these people, they would be on the side of the outside person or the inside person. So the end had been picked up in teams. Remember, we used to play Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, remember? This is a much nicer one. And then they would play tug of war with each other. So they would do things like that. Anyway, so he named his book after that. And first, I want to describe this A1 school as it has been described here in this book. As you may recognize, I've changed the order in which I'm giving these things, because after that previous presentation, I knew I had to do things that would be a little bit different from the way I was going to do it otherwise. So, here we go. This school is such a beautiful place. And we look around and say how lovely it is, what a nice time for the kids to come here. Well, most one-room schools weren't like this, I have to tell you. This was a paradigm of one-room school as we see it here. Let me tell you, I got interested in one-room schools when I first came to Ohio, which was in 1954. And as I would travel around the state, going to various meetings and things, I would see these buildings around, sitting in a field somewhere, starting to fall apart, maybe full of hay, which the farmer had put in there, or some old rusty farm equipment. And I really recognized early that they were either one-room schools or they were old one-room churches, one or the other, sometimes both in the same building. And that interested me, and I started paying some attention to them. Back there, I looked up one day in the 1950s, and they recorded that there were still 10,000 one-room schools still in existence, still operating in the 1950s. I looked up last week an article, and it said there's still 400 one-room schools in the United States. And those, you may recognize, are all in very isolated areas. Little islands someplace, or out in the middle of a big plateau, or what have you. And probably some of them will remain in existence of necessity. But now with the internet, maybe even those will be going. There also, as I looked up, I checked Google, the internet, and found over 4 million references to one-room schools listed in Google. There are one-room school societies all over the place. I don't know, does the Collins School belong to any organization of other one-room schools? But there are all kinds of one-room school groups all over the country. So there's a great nostalgia for the one-room school. And there should be, because it's an important part of our heritage. One-room school predominated the American school system from the middle 1800s until really the First World War. And with the First World War, we had two phenomena. We had the growing industrialization, urbanization of society, and we had the development of the automobile and the road system. So the one-room school was on its way out. But for over 50 years, the one-room school was the predominant purveyor of education in this country, and made its great contribution, carrying out, incidentally, the wishes of our founding fathers. Our founding fathers were notable for the distinctive education that they had. They were a remarkable group of people when you think of them brought together bringing together the aristocracy of the Washington, of the Jefferson, with the humble backgrounds of people like Hamilton and Benjamin Franklin, but all of them believed in education. Jefferson wanted to put into the Constitution a provision for federal support of education. He didn't manage to do that. But he did make a statement which, in a sense, has characterized what he and the others believed were necessary and why we have developed this great school system. It's an aphorism which you've probably seen quoted before. It says, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. And he did manage, along with the others, to provide for federal financing of education through the land grant program. As the expansion westward took place, as the lands were opened up, 1/16 part of the land was set aside to provide funding for education. And that provided the money which helped to early develop this whole network of one-room schools. And the vision was that there would be a one-room school every 5 miles, so that it would be within reach of every child. Every child, at the most, would have to walk or ride the mule or whatever it is, 2.5 miles, and they could get to school. Now, as we look around, we see where the population is a little denser. You didn't have to go that far. So if you were in Yellow Springs, you could go to a variety of one-room schools. And Mary has said that there's some of them up here on the board. I don't know which ones are here, but the ones I identified, in Yellow Springs, there's a school. Now, those buildings are still in existence because they've been taken over and made into houses where people live. So if you haven't noticed them before, there's one down on Winter Street, which was a schoolhouse. There's one out on Dayton Road, just near East Enine Road. I don't know if you've noticed that. These are brick buildings, and there's a schoolhouse there. There's one out on Hyde Road, just close to the entrance to the Morris Bean Foundry. So there are those 3 schools. They're about a mile and a half, 2 miles apart from each other. Right there serving Yellow Springs in that period between 1850 and 1900 or so. And then there's a very interesting school, of course, down on South College Street at the corner of High Street, which has fairly recently been converted into a house. And I'll tell you a little about that in a moment. The last one of that kind of school that was still operating in the Yellow Springs area, who knows?
Goats. Goats? One in Goats?
The one which is now the Unitarian Fellowship House. And that was in operation until sometime around 1960. I think that's a 2-room school. And that finally got shut down as a schoolhouse as late as the 1960s. So the one-room school was very, very prevalent in this area. And we might know that in Ohio, this development of the school system was following a national pattern. But a man whose name was Reverend Stowe, S-T-O-W-E, who was an instructor in a seminary in Cincinnati, was commissioned in 1850 to go to Europe and make a study of elementary education. And came back and made some recommendations for it. And it happens that just at the same time he was doing that, of course, another great educator was also making recommendations about the necessity for a common school. And that, of course, was and what they were both suggesting were 3 kind of basic principles. And I got them down here somewhere. They said there are 3 basic principles that they would like to see implemented, and they were. Second, that the teachers should be professionally trained. This was an especially strong point with Horace Mann. Because as Horace Mann went around and saw what was going on in the schools, he was dismayed at the practices of what people were calling teaching. And he very much insisted on the idea that teachers need to be professionally trained. And third, that education should be compulsory up to a certain age, because he felt that the demands of the local economy, of the family and so forth, would also often preempt the possibility of children getting an education if there was not a compulsory provision. So he did that. So anyway, as a result, we had these schools set up, and as all institutions do, they varied in their quality. And as I said, this is probably one of the best ones. But Jesse Stewart's down in Kentucky probably was among the poorer examples of schools. These were the local schools in Kentucky, first of all, were very isolated, geographically and socially. They were very poorly financed. And they were very much in the hands of local groups who were more interested in having their children go out and pick tobacco than going to school. One of the things about the schoolroom, which would differ very much from Jesse Stewart's schoolroom, is the arrangement of the chairs. Because, as I'll tell you one of these stories, the children were not always able to be segregated in age grade groups, because sometimes some kids didn't manage to get to school until they were 13 or 14-year-old, and therefore they would be in the first grade and couldn't sit in the little seats up in the front of the classroom, so the seats would have to be moved around a little bit to accommodate that. So I wanted first to describe that school, and I lost my page again. But I'll find it. On page 126. Nearly all of the rural schools were one-room and two-room barn-like structures in need of paint and repairs, badly located, inadequately ventilated in hot weather, and poorly heated by old-fashioned iron stoves in winter. Often the students or patrons helped the teacher cut stove wood to relieve the coal shortage. Sometimes the school had a pie social or some other fundraising event to finance a paint or repair job. The outdoor refectories were usually smelly, full of flies, and marred by usual laphernalia. Unless the teacher insisted upon it, uneven lime was provided for improved sanitation. The water supply often had to be carried from a neighboring farm, and a single dipper served all the pupils. The teachers often had enough ingenuity to improve the appearance of the inside of the schoolroom with oil leaves, wildflowers, etc. So, all the one-room schools didn't look like this building, as I mentioned. Now, Jesse Stewart comes as a 17-year-old to teach at this schoolhouse where his sister had been run out by a bully. And this is about his third or fourth day at school, I think. The following Monday, I had stayed at the schoolhouse to do some work on my school records. And Don Conway had gone home with his sister and brothers. This was the first afternoon I had stayed at school after all my pupils had gone. The room was very silent, and I was busy working when I heard soft footsteps walking around the building. I looked through the window on my left, and I saw Guy Hawkins' head. His uncombed, tousled hair was ruffled by the Lonesome Valley wind. I wondered why he was coming back. I wondered if he had forgotten something. Then I realized This was the first time he had been able to catch me by myself. And I remembered a few other incidents in Greenwood County's rural schools, where people had come back to school when the teacher was there alone, and had beaten hell out of them. I could recall 3 or 4 such incidents, but I didn't have time to think about them, not now. Guy came in the door with his cap in his hand. I didn't want him to see me looking up at him, but I did see him coming down the broad middle aisle, taking long steps and swinging his big arms. He looked madder than any man or animal I'd ever seen. He walked up to my desk and stood silently before me. "Did you forget something, Guy?" I asked. "No, I've never forgotten nothing," he reminded me. "Then what do you want?" I asked. "Whip you," he said. "Why do you want to whip me?" I asked him. "I didn't like your sister," he said. "You know what I've done to her." "Yes, I know what you did to her," I said. "I'm going to do the same thing to you," he threatened. "Why do you want to fight me?" I asked him. I dropped my pencil and stood up facing him. "I don't like him," he said. "I don't like teachers. I said never another person with your name would teach in this school, not as long as I'm here." "It's too bad you don't like me or my name," I said, my temper rising. "I won't be satisfied until I've whipped you," he said. "Can you go to another school?" I asked him. "The Valley School is not too far from where you live." "No, no," he shouted. "If anybody leaves, you'll leave. I was in Lonesome Valley first. I ain't going to no other school because of you." "Then there's nothing left for us to do but fight," I said. "I've come to teach the school and want to teach it. Maybe you will." Well, he goes on and describes a rip-roaring fight where they fight with each other and so forth. And finally, he spun wild. His fingernail took a streak of hot from my neck and left a red mark that smarted and the blood oozed through. I pounded his chin. I caught him on the beardy jaw. The beardy jaw. This is a first-grade student. I reeled him back and hauled up. I gave him a left with a short pistol. My right in a split second caught his mouth. Blood spurted again. Yet he was not through, but I knew I had him. "Had enough?" I panted. He didn't answer. And finally he knocks him down and he gives up and so forth. And then at the end, next day, when Guy Stewart came to his senses, he looked up at me. I was applying the wet, cool handkerchief to his head. When he started to get up, I helped him to his feet. "Mr. Stewart, I really got a cord on me," he admitted. "You're some fighter." This was the first time he'd ever called me Mr. Stewart. I had heard, but I pretended not to hear him call me Old Jess every time my back was turned. One more story? Okay. Now, here he has, he's come to the school, he's being paid $68 a month, which was fairly good money, but not nearly as much money as he could have made if he was working out in the tobacco fields. He was rooming and boarding with the Conway family. He paid them $25 a month room and board. And he had wanted a project to paint the school building. They painted all the walls a nice white color, and he was very proud of how nice and clean and all the school looked. And then suddenly he goes in and he finds big brown splotches of amber on top of his nice snow white paint. And he's trying to figure out who could have done this. He thinks about Guy Hawkins, of course. He knew that Guy Hawkins chewed tobacco, but he didn't think he would do it because he had helped him paint it, actually. So the next day, Friday, I took my lunch and walked outside and around back of the schoolhouse. My pupils were sitting under the shade of the tall sycamores eating their lunch, all but one. She was making the amber spittle fly against the newly painted boards. A girl. And Beta Conway, the beautiful 14-year-old daughter of my trustee. "Beta," I said before she swung me, "what do you have in your mouth? What are you doing?" "Nothing," she said. "Don't you spit it out," I warned her. "Let me see what it is." She didn't spit the quid from her mouth. She took it out and showed it to me, and then she looked down at her bare feet. "Why did you do this?" I asked. She didn't answer me. I asked her again. Mr. Stewart, I worked in the green tobacco, she said. It was hot and smelly, and after I quit working in it, I craved a chaw. You mean you got the tobacco habit by working in green tobacco and smelling it, I asked her. Yes, she answered. I've worked in it all my life, and I never got the habit by smelling green growing tobacco, I told her. If she had ever chewed tobacco at her home, I'd never seen her do so. I thought about the ideas I've had about Otis Salyers and Guy Hawkins. I'd actually thought they were the guilty ones. If I had picked over my students, trying to select the pupil that had spit amber spittle on this white wall, Beta Conway would have been one of the last I would have picked. I was sorry for ever thinking it was Guy Hawkins and Otis Salyers. Beta, why did you spit on this white wall? I asked her. Because I like to spit on it, she admitted. I like to see brown against white. When I dismissed school this afternoon, I want you to remain, I told her. None of the pupils had heard or seen me talking to Beta. I don't believe any of my pupils knew who was spitting on the wall. But that afternoon, when I dismissed school, Beta Conway remained. I waited until the schoolyard was cleared of pupils. Don Conway must have known. That's her brother. And I think a few others suspected what was going to take place. I had to back up what I had said. I laid big and beautiful Beta Conway across my lap and I applied the geography book to her in stinging spanks. Not enough to make her whimper, though. She had hooked too many crows according to tobacco and pulled too many green worms from the broad leaves of worm-hot tobacco suckers from the stalks. She was beautiful, but she was durable, and a little spanking didn't hurt her. It only wounded her pride. 2 problems were solved. Anyway. He then decided he had to move out of the Conway house. And he found a different place to move him forward. And actually it was 5 miles away. And he started out walking to school every day back, but then he found out that he could borrow a mule from his landlord in exchange for milking his cows in the morning. So he would milk the cows in the morning and then ride his mule to school. So anyway, it's a great book, it's full of other, and he's written about 10 different books. Wonderful stories about the folklore of Kentucky, stories about teaching in those early days. Mary, you have something you want to do?
People have questions and comments about their own school days. I had a first grade teacher, and you already know how old I am, it makes me even older. But we lived in a little town, Illinois, not far from Galesburg, Illinois, where Lincoln had some of the debates. And she told us that when she was 2 years old, her father put her up in the tree. Actually, was in front of the house where I was born, and she had seen Lincoln. Now, she was pretty old. She had, when she was teaching us, she had a voice. I've never heard one like it. It was as though she gargled with honey. It was just, I can still hear her. She was very reasoned. And when our friend showed us the pantaloons, she would sit, at her desk, and we could see her black pantaloons. And that was quite something. But then the other thing I remembered about her, she decorated the room at Christmas, high up with Christmas pictures of beautiful Madonnas. But they were all black and white, and they were also on green and red paper, but she never changed them for years. So you saw those faded Madonnas on faded paper. But she told wonderful stories in this honeyed voice of hers, and it would go on very slowly. And I always loved it because I knew when she sat down it was going to be a long story.
I did say before that I was going to say something special about the High Street School, and I did want to mention that to you. In 1829, the state legislature of Ohio passed a law authorizing taxes for public education and providing for common schools for the instruction of youth of every class and grade without distinction in reading, writing, arithmetic, and other necessary branches of common education, providing that nothing in this act contained shall be so construed as to permit black or mulatto persons to attend the schools hereby established. So, Ohio established the legal public school system and also established segregation as a law of the land in 1829. Now, in 1848, somebody recognized that they'd done something wrong and they tried to fix a little bit, and they provided communities containing 20 or more black or colored children of any age and desirous of attending school shall constitute a school district for such children, and it shall be lawful for colored persons residing in such school district as aforesaid to assemble and organize said district, appoint school directors of their own number, to erect and repair a suitable schoolhouse of their own, procure suitable teachers, etc. It was at that time that the High Street School was built. The High Street School was a school for black children in Yellow Springs, established by the black community, supported by the black community, and run by the black community. And that continued, interestingly enough, until 1887. Now, in 1887, following the Civil War, there was the period of Reconstruction, and there was a bit of confusion about the question of segregation of schools. And finally, there was a very famous case of Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court, which established the principle of separate but equal, which legalized segregation. This was carried out predominantly, of course, in the South. Well, when this happened, Ohio suddenly, and many of the other northern states, then went ahead and, I keep dropping the same paper, don't I? They went ahead and they provided a new law, and the new law did away with the segregation which had been provided for in 1847. So in 1888, the 1847 law was repealed, and it was required that all schools admit all children, black or white. By this time, unfortunately, especially in many of our cities and so forth, there had been established separate black schools and white schools, which continued to exist de facto, even though they were no longer required legally. In Yellow Springs, however, the High Street School was closed, and the black children were then sent over to join with the white kids in the other schools, over the objection of the black parents, who were sure that their school was a better school than those other schools were at the time. So that's an interesting little footnote on our social history. There might be some question as to how this teacher managed to handle when Disney Stewart went to teach his class. He had somewhere between 35 and 45 kids at 8 different grades of all ages, and the age is not consonant with the grades. And you might wonder, how does he manage to do this? Well, he reports that he taught 54 different lessons. Now, I don't know how you work out, how many different subjects and how many different grades and so forth it takes to make 54. But you know that his method of doing it, as I mentioned before, was to have the children come up on the recitation bench, sit next to his desk, and go over the lessons. They also used a system which they had imported from England called the Lancastrian system, which came from Lancaster, and that they would take each grade level, and the teacher would pick out whoever was the smartest kid or whoever he thought was the most smartest or able and teach that kid, and that kid in turn would teach the other kids in that grade. But the teacher would then carry out the same. The other thing that we should remember is that the curriculum at the time was a fairly limited curriculum in terms of the number of subjects, and included a great deal of repetitive exercise. You would spend, and I don't know, I remember still when I went to school, now, I'm older than all of you, I went to elementary school in the 1920s, and I spent an hour every day practicing my handwriting. Remember that? So these kids would spend an hour every day doing handwriting. They would spend an hour every day learning their spelling words. They would spend an hour every day practicing their arithmetic number tables. So, you know, you could see how the day would get used up fairly well with activities that did not require that much kind of active teaching of the class as we expect these days in our schoolroom. Yes?
When I started school, in elementary school, after the teacher taught the younger children, and she often excused them to go outside to play while she was.
I think that was fairly common, the recognition that the little children couldn't sit for so long.
My mother taught elementary school from 1913 to 1916, and at that time, the school was not graded. I think town schools were, but country schools were not. But by the 1920 census, I noticed that when a person said they were a teacher, then the next question, graded or ungraded.
Do you think that it's all likely that one-room schoolhouses will be making a comeback as sort of the next step from homeschooling?
I don't see that, no. Now, but what we do have remaining from the one-room schoolhouse, which sort of comes back every once in a while and then disappears, is the multi-graded classroom. And that carries some of those same elements. And it's something which I incidentally have always been in favor of, because I think there's some real strengths in that. It's done these days more often out of necessity than out of design, but I think it is a desirable practice. Somebody else, yes?
I remember my sixth grade teacher was old school, and he would have us do those, and he had, you know, our arms couldn't rest on the desk. And, oh boy. And we had a fruit roll for him one day. And he didn't like that at all. He wasn't very good spirits, I guess. A little embarrassing.
You know, one of the things I notice nowadays is kids do not know how to hold a pencil. Have you noticed that? Of course, they don't have to, because they're not going to do much writing anymore. But it always bothers me. I see them, I want to grab the pencil out of their hand, which I keep them used to do, you know.
When the schools were integrated in 1880s, I think it was 1880s, Phyllis may know there was a lot of fear in town what would happen when the black children and the white children went to the same school. And there was a remarkable black man who went the night before and visited every black home and reassured the parents. And where's Phyllis? Is she not dead?
That was Silas Wills. That was Silas Wills.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and as a result, it was a very peaceful, well, I'm sure there were problems, but that day, next day went through as it should have been.
Silas Wills claims to have stood at the door of the school and counted the children that came, and they all came.
Yeah. Let's note that we're just 2 weeks away from the 50th anniversary of the desegregation law of the Supreme Court.
There's some pictures up there in the High Street School at the corner of High and South College, those two brick houses. And there's a school on, what's that little street? Hank Dyer lived
Elm Street.
back in Mary Letson's house.
Pleasant, I think.
Park
Street.
Street.
Park.
Park
Yeah.
Street. I can't remember who the women were. 2 women who taught at Antioch. You would know.
Sure. It was Esther Holt and
Yeah.
Mary.
And that was that same type of building, and it was a school, and she said in the spring, when the thaws would come, the marbles would come up. I think those little stories are so absolutely marvelous. Thank you very much.
we would like you to take some refreshments on this side. And if you are not yet a member of the Historical Society,